Welcome to Talk Travel with Heather Tate, North Mississippi's podcast for savvy travelers. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is a weekly podcast that airs every Monday on the Shark 102.3 FM radio station based in Ripley, Mississippi, and is then released as a podcast. Travel advisor and travel enthusiast Heather Tate of Whimsical Destinations gives listeners expert travel tips curated through the years of personal and professional experience. By clicking subscribe, you'll have a new travel tip to add to your collection delivered to your podcast library every Monday. Talk Travel with Heather Tate is brought to you by Sun Bear Studio. Sun Bear Studio is a boutique recording studio in the heart of Ripley, Mississippi. When you record with us at Sun Bear Studio, we can mix, master, register, and publish your music, your podcast, or your family story. Email us when you're ready at sunbear@jc.media.
Good morning, Northeast Mississippi travelers. This is Heather with Talk Travel with Heather Tate, and I am so excited to share my adventures and tried and true tips with you, whether you are also a seasoned traveler, a hopeful traveler, or currently an armchair traveler, meaning you're going to follow along with us from home for now. This is our 114th episode of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. And a couple of weeks ago, I had a special guest in the studio with me, my 12-year-old son, London, and we talked a little bit about our trip to London that we took a few weeks ago. And one of the things that he mentioned that he was most surprised about was that he thought the people were extremely friendly and he thought the food was good. And those were two things that he said he's heard me talk about for years to try to prepare him for, so he had a great experience. So I mentioned that I went to London 18 years ago. I was studying abroad. I did a children's literature course for a summer, and it's one of my most amazing memories of all of my college career. At this time, I was a college student without the benefit of Instagram reels at my fingertips to tell me where all the best places to go for snacks and a traditional English tea and English breakfast. I had to do all my research then, really by guidebooks that were going to have limited information and that could become pretty dated, sometimes from year to year. So I had a lot more resources at my disposal. I also had more money in my pocket than I did as a college student. So I look back and I think, did this place really change very much, or did I change? And I think it can be both. So I remember the food being extremely expensive, and if I'm honest, a little bland. This time around, I found the food to be amazing overall, and the people were much friendlier than I remember. So that made me think, again, did an entire city change, or did I change? So how much of it is a place changing, and how much is it our own perspective that changes? I mean, London as a city is 2,000 years old. We saw a Roman wall that was built over 2,000 years, or right at 2,000 years ago. And the skyline is ever changing, even though some of the places we went were hundreds of years old, 1,000 years old. We went to Tower of London, 1,000 years old. You know, we saw Windsor Castle, 1,000 years old. Like, we went to all these places, hundreds of years old. So I'm like, how much has really changed? The skyline, though, is continually changing, and I find this fascinating. Maybe not changing at the rate of, say, New York City. You know, I think of London as being like this, eternal city, but it still changes. One of the things that dominated the sky now was the Shard. And London talked about that. It's the tallest building in the UK. It wasn't even there when I was there 18 years ago. And now it's a building that dominates the skyline. You cannot look at the skyline of London without seeing the Shard. So they have a beautiful mix of old and new, so sometimes side by side. And they don't bulldoze those beautiful old buildings to make room for the new. Instead, they find a way to work in the new amongst the older historical buildings. Okay, so a place can change by what is being added, sometimes what is being taken away, the food. So then I asked myself last time, was it that the food wasn't great, or was it that I just wasn't going to the best places? Was it that I was going to places that I could afford on a college student budget? And this time I had a little more discretionary funds. I did more research on where I wanted to go. We went to a lot of markets. The borough market was absolutely fascinating, and everything there was like farm to table. I had lavender lemonade, the most amazing strawberries that are viral on TikTok, like strawberries with chocolate sauce. My husband had a sausage roll, which he doesn't even typically care for sausage, and he said that it was an amazing sausage roll. We had so many homemade things there, cheeses, olive oils, they had truffles, that it was incredible. And we also went to a church. It was a church, and it has since been deconsecrated and turned into a food hall. But they have so many churches there, so many beautiful buildings that even though a church group of people no longer meet there, they did not want to lose this history of the building itself. And so it was turned, Mercado Market was turned into a beautiful food hall with homemade Italian food and all different kinds of ethnic foods, Indian, sushi, Spanish empanadas, like so many different things there where you could experience in a beautiful setting. Another thing, the excursion rate was definitely more in our favor this time. When we went the 18 years ago, like 1 pound equaled $2 American. So say I'm eating lunch and I'm like, I just spent $15 on this sandwich and a cup of soup. And I'm like, no, I didn't spend $15. I spent 15 pounds. It was $30 then. The conversion rate is more in our favor now. Our flights cost us the same 18 years later as they did 18 years ago. So that's something that is, that has not changed, even though overall, I would say a lot of flight prices, especially in the US, have really increased. Our flight, we watched it though to get a much better price, wasn't much more. So, how did the pandemic change things? And I wondered this. For at least 2 years, 2+ years, England was on lockdown. They didn't have people going out, they didn't have people coming in. And just as our culture has shifted a little bit, theirs has too. And you can notice that. When we were walking along the River Thames, there's an entire wall with hearts all over it, painted hearts representing each person who died in the UK during pandemic. That was a very humbling, somber moment to walk there, and that's something that wasn't there the last time I went. I also found when I said that the people were so friendly, I don't know if it's because I came with young children this time, and the British are very family friendly. And so I found them being very kind to us. Sometimes we were trying to find where we were going and we weren't even asking anyone. We might have appeared at some moments like, okay, which way do we go? Are we going out this side of the tube, which is their underground subway system, or are we going this side? And we were just trying to decide which way we were going. And we'd have someone come up to us and point us in the right direction, offer to help us. We would be sitting at brunch, getting ready to go to high tea later that afternoon. And I did color coordinate my boys. Remember, I told you for picture purposes, sometimes putting a little effort in what you're wearing, planning your outfit so you coordinate looks really good in pictures. And sometimes you'll notice that people are nicer to you when you color coordinate. It makes them happy. The boys were wearing pale pink. I was wearing a fascinator hat that was pale pink and a floral dress. And we had multiple couples coming up to us telling us how nice we looked and asking us what we were celebrating. I don't remember that happening 18 years ago at all. People just walking up to us, being very friendly and talking to us. But another thing that I think has changed is that I don't think England is quite as formal in their dress as they were when I went. And I think that's something that the pandemic has shifted. There are less people in the business district. One of our cab drivers told us this on a tour. So there are much less people walking around at lunchtime in the business district because more people are working from home. We know that's something that's shifted here in our own country. That's happened other places too. People are no longer doing the traditional 9 to 5. Some are doing a 3 or 4 day work week, and some are working at home remote part of the time or all of the time. With that, then, has changed the formality of an unofficial dress code. So one thing I wanted to point out is if you go to a place often, like I haven't been to London in 18 years, but if you go to a place often, you don't notice changes as easily as if there's been a big gap. 5 years, 10 years, in my case, almost 2 decades. You'll notice those things more. So then I thought, how much of this is that I have changed? I'm a more experienced traveler, so I know where to go, where to look for to find the best places to eat. that I'm trying to always be culturally sensitive when I travel. So maybe it's not that the people are nicer. This is something that as Americans we need to ask ourselves. Maybe I am not unintentionally offending groups of people by the way that I am dressing or acting, that then they are naturally friendlier to me. So sometimes we think, oh, the place has changed, but really maybe it's us that's changed. Maybe, or maybe it's that in a way our country our world went through this pandemic that tries to remind us that we're all in this together and we should be kinder to each other. And so I wondered then, when we go somewhere, think about this. Say you go somewhere that you're returning to your place you went to on your honeymoon. It can work in the reverse too. Like you have this same expectations from when you went somewhere 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 25 years ago. And you go and it's not the same. Is it that the place has changed or is it that you've changed? Maybe a place seemed amazing when you went on your honeymoon. 20 years later, you're like, I can't believe I love this. Maybe it hasn't been updated in 20 years. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe our expectations have really grown and we aren't realistic. Maybe we want the pricing to be the same as it was a decade ago, even 5 years ago. And we know that's not the case. So sometimes I think a place can change. It can change for the better. Like in some experiences, or sometimes things don't always change for the better. But other times we need to ask ourselves, is the place changing? Or are we changing? Is our perspective changing? Or is it a little bit of both? And I think that is what happened on this trip. We had an amazing time. I think I went with realistic expectations. I think maybe I tried to, maybe sometimes setting, they say like if you don't put too much on something, too high of expectations, you're less likely to be disappointed. But I think when telling the boys, I'm like, I don't think people are going to be super friendly to us here like we've experienced in other places, like Portugal and Greece. And I also told them, I was like, okay, I know that it's still, you're still going to be speaking English, but that doesn't mean our food's the same. We're different cultures, even though we have a lot of shared history with England. That doesn't mean that we do things the same way. And so we need to remember when we go to take off our American hat, right? And be willing to put on the fascinator. And I say that metaphorically, meaning like when we go somewhere, we need to look at it through their lens, not through our lens as an American, right? And I think you have a much better experience overall when you do that. And we had an amazing experience. So that's all the time we have for this week of Talk Travel with Heather Tate. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope maybe it helped you look at a place from a new perspective, right? With it, with the perspective that you can see somewhere through the eyes of maybe how a local would, which is not how I saw England, because you still bring your own expectations and your own life views, but that maybe that helps you step back a little bit and have more realistic expectations. Life is an amazing adventure. Wherever you go, whatever you do this week, take that trip. Make those memories. Life is short. You won't regret it.
This show is made possible by JC Media, LLC in Ripley, Mississippi. JC Media owns the Shark 102.3 Classic Rock FM radio station where the show is hosted, and Sun Bear Recording Studio where the interviews are recorded. We need your feedback and support. If you listen to the podcast on a player like iTunes, Google Podcast, or Amazon Music, please subscribe to the show and leave us a review. We also have an email in which you can share your feedback. That email is theshark1023@gmail.com. Subscribe to our podcast on your favorite app or stream episodes online at shark1023.com/podcasts. Today's episode was produced by Melinda Marsalis. It was edited by Rick Williams and engineered by Chris Marsalis. The podcast technician is Joyce Grady.